play the video first. Yeah, just put it in the next slide. I'm Christina Beech, the daughter-in-law of Barry Beech, who was diagnosed with asbestos-related lung cancer in 2018. So Barry was born in Liverpool, and he came up here. He was in the Navy, and he came up here and he was in Rosyth, and that's where he met Helen. So he lived up here for most of his adult life then after he came out of the Navy, and he had obviously my husband Barry as well. But he was a really nice man, really kind man. Everybody that met him really liked him. He was a really good dad and a good granddad, and good great-granddad as well. It was his breathing that kind of went, you could hear it when he was sitting, you could hear him trying to take breaths in, and he had diabetes. And it was his diabetes nurse that actually thought that there was something not quite right. She could hear like crackling. So when he went, when we went, I went to every single appointment with him, everything. I mean, I went to every doctor appointment with Barry. And when they took his lung, they took a biopsy from his lung, that seemed to be the only time that I've ever seen him really kind of bothered. And then when we went to the hospital for them to tell us that he actually had lung cancer, and he had, I thought, right, that's fine, because cancer's curable now. They can do so many different things with cancer, and I'm always quite a positive, optimistic person, so I was all right, we'll get this fixed, we'll sort this, you won't have to worry. But then they told us that he had pleural plaques, and they asked if he had been exposed to asbestos throughout his life, and obviously in the Navy he was in like hammocks, and if you're in a boat and it's cold, you're going to try and sleep as close as you can to the heating. So all these pipes in the ships were all cladded with asbestos, so that's probably where he was first exposed to it, being in the Navy. And then when he came out of the Navy, he did different jobs, but the job that he ended up in was maintenance for a company, and the roof of the factory, and Ellen worked there too, his wife, the roof of the factory was just all asbestos. And Helen always says that she can remember the particles coming down onto the floor of the factory floor, and Barry would come in and sweep that up. And then maybe twice a year, he would have to go up to the roof and clean the roof and sweep up all the stuff off the roof. And that's probably where he got most of his asbestos exposure. But when the doctor told us that because of the scarring, there was no way they could treat it, because they couldn't take away the cancer because there would be no lung function. And he was already at that point quite breathless. I think that was a massive devastation to us all. And I don't think we actually understood that he was not going to be here. And I think for me, I suppose I went through that kind of denial bit, and he did too. And I remember seeing him going through a different stage of, how long have I got? Practical side. Right, okay, that's great. We'll go and do some stuff that I've never done before. We went and hired one of the big Winnebagos. We went up north of Scotland because he'd never done that before. That was actually hilariously funny, and we had a really good time. So there were really good memories there. When Barry was first diagnosed, and I think things went quite quickly after that, we didn't have to fill forms in or anything like that. And Asbestos Action, we got the leaflet from the hospital. I think one of the nurses handed me this and says that they would contact them. And I can't remember quite how it all came about, but I know that that was the contact that we got, and it was all about filling in these forms, making sure that he got the care that he needed, anything that he needed. And when the first visit from Asbestos Action was actually Diane, and right there and then she just went through everything with him, sat with him and made sure that he knew all the support that he would get. And for me, he was getting that support. That was for Barry. I didn't realise at the time though how important that whole charity would have been to me and to Helen and the rest of the family. Because when we were at our darkest days, when we were at the point where we couldn't talk to him, get through to him, he was in that selfish zone, I got the phone call. It was just like how is everything? Are you all right, Christina? And that was when I just went, grief for all. And then Diane came and visited him, and I don't know what she said to him. I really don't, and I know how I can't even express how bad he was at that moment, how self-absorbed he was, and the next minute it was like night and day. He went and asked my daughter to get things. It was Valentine's Day, get Ellen roses, they're over there, a balloon, and it was just so wonderful. And I think at that moment Helen knew. She didn't know all the stuff that had been on in the background, but she just thought, oh, he's turned that corner, that selfishness, and he's thinking of me. And that was absolutely Asbestos Action that caused that. That wasn't, he couldn't have done that on his own. I couldn't help him with it. I was in that zone, I was in that grieving process, if you like. And for me, I couldn't pull him out. And for whatever Diane did, she pulled him out of that. And she couldn't have done that without being with him and actually speaking to him face to face. I think that was the most important thing for me, is that she actually visited him in his home, in his environment, and spoke to him. That wouldn't have happened on a phone call. I'm going to tell you, I don't think I would have been able to get through the last few months without Diane. I don't think Barry would have got through the months without Diane. It's unmeasurable how much thanks I've got for the charity, and specifically Diane, who actually visited him. I would recommend for anybody that's been diagnosed with an asbestos-related illness, their families, or even if them themselves, to reach out to the Asbestos Action charity, because they were there for me when I needed them. They were there for Barry when he needed them, and they were there for the family when we all needed them. You don't know what you need. You don't know what help you're going to need, even if you think you're the strongest person. I'm the one that everybody comes to. Somebody needs help in their family. Christina can fix it. I could do anything. In fact, my husband thinks that I could be a brain surgeon if I wanted to. And it's just about not having that fear to do something. But when somebody in your family that you love dearly is in a place where you cannot help them, you cannot pull them out of there, sometimes that's when you need the help. And I remember a quote from a book I read by Charles Mackesy, and it was the boy asking the horse a question, and the question was, what was the bravest thing you ever asked, said the boy. Help, said the horse. Sometimes we all need to ask for help, and it is brave. And the people that give you the help, you cannot imagine how much that means to you during that time. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Now, I'm no expert, but hopefully I'll give you an insight into the journey Barry and her family had, and it's true what they say. You're not given a handbook on life, on how you should manage or cope with it, how you should feel and react, because we're all experiencing things differently, and your perspective is yours alone. I can, however, let you know how it was for us and expand a little on the VT you just watched. When Barry was diagnosed, his lung function was already not good, and he struggled daily to breathe. And although his first reaction was, right, I'm going to go and do some great stuff that I've never done before and never had time to do, in reality, there wasn't a lot he could actually do at that time. So on a side note, and to quote Benjamin Franklin, don't put off until tomorrow what you can do today. On the day Barry was diagnosed in the hospital, a nurse gave us a leaflet. It was for the Asbestos Action charity at Tayside. And I honestly cannot recall phoning them or what we did next, but all I can remember is we got a visit from Diane, who was a bit like a whirlwind, to be fair. She took control and she went through everything. Have you done this? Have you got this? You need to do that. Really quite a lot of good practical advice, and also financial support. She looked into that for Barry and Helen too. But I didn't realise at the time how important the charity would actually become to us all. Barry went through what I can only describe as a grieving process for himself. At times this presented it as being very self-absorbed, selfish even, which led to periods of melancholy, frustration and then anger. It was a difficult time for us all, for both Barry and the family, and because each of us were grieving too, and we were at different stages. It's actually difficult to put into words, as you're almost grieving in front of the person, or rather trying not to. This led to avoiding the elephant in the room, which in hindsight may have been something I would have actually done differently. We avoided talking about his death. But maybe if I'd sat with him and asked him if he wanted to talk about it, maybe what he would have liked at his funeral, for example. Because we often had really hearty laughs after a funeral that we'd attended in the past, talking about things that we didn't want or that we wanted at our own funerals. And I can remember one time Barry saying, "Don't you be wasting money on a good coffin for me. I want cremated." And his son, my husband Barry, saying, "Oh, don't worry, Dad, I'm just going to put you in a tatty sack." And then conversation around how big this tatty sack would actually have to be, and if we'd clean it or we'd maybe leave a couple of tatties in there for his journey. So why was it so difficult for us to have that conversation now? In the first year following his diagnosis, although he was breathless and couldn't walk far, he looked actually quite healthy. He had weight on him. And he was not really very much different from what we had in the last few years, because it was very slowly progressing, and we were with him all the time, so we didn't really notice it. It wasn't really apparent to us. This kind of put us in a false sense of security. And we were in our denial stage at that point. And I can recall our cousin Vanessa coming over from America to visit him and saying to him in a very light-hearted way, "You look great, Uncle Barry. I think you're kidding us all on." Now, he took great offence to that comment. And any time anybody said he looked well or he looked good, he would say something like, "Well, I'm not." I tried to talk to him about how Vanessa was and that she was in her denial stage and she was hurting and she really didn't want to believe that he was not going to be here either. This is when the charity really was able to help us and support him and talk to him and explain things and let him be himself and let him get his fears and his worries out. Now, Diane from the charity visited often, and in the early days, spending time with both Helen and Barry, keeping them positive and having a laugh with them, pausing the conversation to let him take wee Bonnie, his dog, out for a pee. And we always knew when Diane had been, because he was much more positive, he was much more upbeat. And you cannot underestimate how important her actual visits were to him. You can't do that over a phone call. It had to be in person. And on occasion, I would take Helen away for some respite, and Diane and Barry would have some one time together. As the months went on, Barry got very low, and he was put on antidepressants. And they worked at first for a wee bit. But I always maintain the best antidepressant that he ever had was a visit from Diane. While Barry was in that, what I called his selfish stage, when he was at his worst, Helen, who'd just turned 84, she developed an infection which turned into sepsis. Barry was so deeply self-absorbed he could not pull himself out, and I couldn't do it either. How can I tell a dying man that his wife may be dying too? How can I tell him that she may even die before him? How can a grieving person help another grieving person? It's very hard. It's too hard at times. And to let you understand, I'm sure many of you here today are the same as me. I've always been the fixer in the family. If there's an issue, don't worry, Christina, Mum, Granny will fix it. She'll work it out. Well, sometimes the fixers feel a wee bit overwhelmed and don't have all the answers. But what we normally do is we say it to ourselves in our head. We give ourselves a shake. We go work it out. But very rarely do we ask for help. It's taken me a long time to say this out loud. In fact, I think I only ever said it to that one person. I'm overwhelmed and I don't know what to do. It probably didn't come out exactly like that. It was most probably an absolute cry for help. And I'm sure if you asked Diane what it was that I actually said, it was definitely not, I'm overwhelmed and I don't know what to do. But at that moment I felt relief as the person that was actually listening. She may not have had all the answers either, but she had a different viewpoint at that moment and stepped in. Yes, you've guessed it, it was Diane with her invisible superhero cape. Once again, she spent time with Barry, talking with him, and he was back. He'd gone into the fifth stage of grievance process, and which is acceptance. He turned his focus on the now and the living, and in turn, I truly believe that it gave Helen back her will to live and her fight. It gave him back his fight. He was determined to be there for his youngest great-granddaughter Willow's birth, which she was. In the last few weeks before Barry left us, things progressed really quickly. However, we were able to have him in the home, comfortable as possible, with the support of the daily carers who took care of his personal needs, which took the burden off of Helen. It allowed us to talk to him, to sing to him, to laugh with him. I know I've said this in my VT, but I'd like to thank the Asbestos Action charity for being there. Without them, I may not have been able to get through some of the darkest times of my life. It also helped me be better prepared for when I lost my own father during COVID. And then earlier this year, we lost Helen. And I know if she'd been here today, she'd want to thank the charity, specifically Diane, for giving her back her Barry when she needed him most.